Hello, good evening, everybody. Today we have the pleasure of having Professor Tobias Specker SJ with us. Professor Specker, born in 1971, studied German literature and Catholic theology in Freiburg and Bochum. After completing his doctorate in the fundamental theology on the French philosopher Jean-Luc Marion, he joined the Society of Jesus in 2001. After working for several years in the Christian-Muslim dialogue, he studied the Islamic-theological Studies in Frankfurt from 2010 to 2013. After tertianship in East Africa, he has been named Junior Professor of the Endowed Professorship, Catholic Theology in the Face of Islam at the Philosophical-Theological University, Sankt Georgen, since 2014-15. In 2020, he finished the habilitation at the Faculty of Theology Fribourg with a thesis on God's Word and the Human Language, Christian Theology of Revelation in Conversation with Islamic Positions in the Inimitability of the Koran, and was named professor in Sankt Georgen in 2021. Since 2021, he is also the superior of the Jesuit community in Sankt Georgen. He is advisor to the subcommission Interreligious Dialogue of the German Bishops' Conference. You're welcome, Professor Specker. You have up to 90 minutes or whatever is convenient to you for this session. And I remind the participants to keep their cameras on during the session, so we make the session as interactive as possible. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fatmi. Thank you, sirs and madams, for joining this conference. So it's always, I think it's a great pleasure, and at the same time it's a challenge to give a conference about well, I don't know, 2,500 kilometers ago, without knowing exactly your context. And I hope I can contribute a little bit to enlighten the horizon of a Christian approach to Christian-Muslim dialogue. That's the main topic. And in my presentation, I will focus on the actual Pope, on the teaching of Pope Francis, especially in the encyclical, in this writing of Pope Francis, Fratelli, Tutti, which is about 4 years old. And then, but feel free during the conversation afterwards to ask whatever questions you have on, well, my personal approach to dialogue, on the experiences. So I've never been to India, unfortunately. I hope to visit the Jesuits and also their Muslim friends. And you, in the years to come, I have a little bit experience with Turkey, and about the 25 years spending time always in summers till 2016 in Turkey, and well, in some Arab countries, and a little bit I spent a half year in East Africa, so in Kenya. So that's my background. Yeah, perhaps I will share the screen now. It might be a little bit easier not only to see me, but to see some notes and presentation. So let me introduce with a picture of Cardinal Toran, who died some years ago and who was a long time the Secretary for Interreligious Dialogue of the Vatican. And it was a little bit like a legacy that he gave his last message in 2018. The title you can read, From Competition to Cooperation. I think that's a very beautiful title. It was a Ramadan message. And he wished in his message to Muslims in May 2018 that the relationship between the religions, and especially between Christianity and Islam, would not be characterized by narrow identity constructions and interreligious competition, but by a cooperation which is based on the faith, on theological-based cooperation for the benefit of a common good of a society. And one can say that his wish, if you like so, was not spoken into the void, because the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, so encyclical, it's a papal document of a quite high rank value, in which the Pope writes on a specific topic for all Catholic Christians to know. It was published in October 2020, and I think it's an important document also for interreligious dialogue. And the main idea in this encyclical is also that there is an interreligious responsibility for a common good. It is somehow a papal answer to what you can call the signs of the time, so the characteristic of a specific time, which is marked, unfortunately, until now, by polarization, by the loss of empathy, by individualism and religious extremism, by a certain dominance of a Western lifestyle, and at the same time, the erosion of democratic institutions. And in this context, the papal encyclical is spoken. Damien Howard, a British Jesuit, puts it quite well when he speaks of an encyclica for tumultuous times, so weird times. In my presentation, I will go 4 steps with you. So I will look at the explicit interreligious references in Fratelli Tutti. Why is it an interreligious document? I will look on certain thematic aspects. The first time, it never speaks directly about Islam or Muslims, and it does not give hints how, from a theological point, religious plurality can be valued. And yet, dialogue, and especially Christian-Muslim encounters, is present in this encyclica in a novel and somehow unusual way, so that the Church's attitude to Islam and Muslims and other religions is also deepened and enriched. So there are 3 points, you see them already all now, in which, although the encyclical itself is not exactly or especially speaking or only speaking about interreligious dialogue, where interreligious dialogue and especially Christian-Muslim dialogue is present. Quite obviously and downright, I would say even revolutionarily, is the fact that Pope Francis traced the entire encyclical back to the encounter and exchange with the Imam of Al-Azhar University, Ahmed al-Tayyib. Francis had already met him several times since May 2016 and prepared with him together the so-called Abu Dhabi Declaration, the Declaration on Human Fraternity in 2019. Last year, we celebrated the 5th year already of this declaration. And Francis himself, if you look into the encyclical, you can find it online on Vatican. If you look for Vatican and Fratelli Tutti, you find it in different languages, English, for example. And right at the beginning, he says in paragraph 5 that he has been inspired by At-Tayyib. And I think that's more like a personal appreciation. It's somehow an analogy to another encyclical you might have heard of. If not, it's very readable, Laudato Si, some years ago, 2015. That's more about ecology. And this encyclical, he draws back not to At-Tayyib, of course, but to the Patriarch of Istanbul, of Constantinople, Bartholomew, the Orthodox leader of the Orthodox world, if you can say so. And that's interesting. So he has an analogy, one encyclical to the to the brother in Christianhood, and then the other to the brother in Islam. And he also says that he was inspired by much more non-Catholic brothers. For Fratelli Tutti, he names Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutti, Mahatma Gandhi, and many others. That's somehow unusual because like this, the dialogical structure is anchored in the structure of the document itself. They are papal teachings, but it's not a one-way communication. The Pope communicates with the Catholics, but it arises out of a worldwide communication between religious leaders, so how to say. And 5 times in this document, the document refers explicitly to Ahmed Attayeb and names him with some ideas where he has been inspiring for Pope Francis. And even more interesting, it quotes the last paragraphs. It quotes entire passages from the Abu Dhabi document, from the document which was signed and written between Al-Azhar and the Vatican Council in 2019. And it's a common declaration. And that's interesting now. A common interreligious declaration becomes part of the Catholic teachings of the Catholic Church when he quotes the document. So that's, I would say, quite revolutionary, but it's completely in the line of Pope Francis to accept and to venerate also the wisdom of other religions by integrating them into his own teachings. It's interesting, Laudato Si, for example, he quotes a quotation of the 16th Persian mystic. I think it's, and I don't only think, I think it's really the first time that in a papal document from 2000 years ago and again, another religious thinker, poet was quoted. So officially, so not in theological documents, of course you find it, but from the official side. And let's come to the third point, why Fratelli Tutti in the main outrun is an interreligious document. It's really articulating a common search on the spiritual level. And that's a level which is very important, especially for the actual Pope, for Pope Francis. On the one hand, the encyclical is referring to a very important person of Christian-Muslim dialogue, Charles de Foucault. I don't know if you have heard about him. He's really, one can say, one of the turning points in the history of Catholic-Muslim relation in the beginning of the 20th century. He lived in the, so Charles de Foucault was really a turning point, and like the reference in Vatican Council Vatican II in the middle of the 60s, where for the first time in history, officially, the Church is declaring that the Church is approaching to Islam and Muslims with esteem and deep respect. And that was an inspiration by Charles de Foucault. And so it's important that Fratelli Tutti again is referring to Charles de Foucault, and also Francis declared him officially as a holy man. And interesting, Fratelli Tutti is closing with 2 prayers. So it's a document of teaching, but it closes with so it recommends 2 prayers. It's an ecumenical prayer for all Christians, that the first one, and then a prayer to the Creator, which is integrative to every person, non-Christians also, who can, if they like, pray this prayer. So it's an inclusive way of finishing the document again, and looking for the commonality or for the approach on a spiritual level. So that was my first point, why Fratelli Tutti is an inspiring document for interreligious dialogue, although it is not a document on interreligious dialogue. just very few points to, it's a long encyclical, and it's somehow, well, Francis is not, it's not as scholastic, I would say. He is somehow repeating things. It's more like a sermon a little bit. And I think it's about 100 or 80 pages. So it's a long thing to read. So just a few thematic points in it. Interesting. You see, you have you have a lot to which comes, but that's all. The first thing, I think it's interesting, what is to be emphasized, and you have the idea perhaps already now, that it's a methodology of side by side. I would call it side by side. It's an idea already Pope Benedict had, that there are two main attitudes where how religions can cooperate and come together. It's face to face and side by side. And face to face means it's a little bit the so-called normal dialogue, while you get to encounter a Muslim or a Christian friend and you ask about their respective beliefs. So what is prophecy for you? How do you believe in God? How do you pray? So the encounter is like a face-to-face meeting, and you also, if it's online, for example, or even if it's written, but you try to get into deeper appreciation and also into deeper knowledge about the faith of the other. Side by side, you really can see, like in a Muslim prayer, in the Salat, you can stand side by side. So you look into the same direction, but you look to a third point. And in side by side, in this idea, it's the point of society, of problems, questions, well, all questions, ethical questions, political questions, and you look from your respective tradition, but with the idea that you can really work together on the common project. So, for example, just to fill it a little bit with my experience, so we have a meeting, a very large meeting of Christian and Muslim theologians since 2000 or 2001, so more than 20 years. And the first 10 years, it was really, and it's published every year, so there are about 120 theologians coming together. And the first 10 years, more or less, we practiced this face-to-face without naming it face-to-face. So there were books and meetings about God, about prayer, about scripture, our understanding of scriptures, about mission, about angels. I think there was a prayer meeting. And then we changed it from side to side. And the next years, up till now, we have meetings about, for example, poverty, migration, also natural science, artificial intelligence was the last one, populism. And it was not only a sociological, but really from the religious traditions. How do we look on the shared problems we both have? So and Fratelli Tutti somehow it's saying, it's inviting all those who carry in their hearts faith in God and faith in the brotherhood of all people to join together and to work together. So that's the idea of Fratelli Tutti. So it's this idea of side by side. And that's more than a mutual coalition of interests. So it's really the idea that by working together, you understand the faith of the other also better, and that it's for a common good of society. The best which can happen, that the religious traditions engage each other for the common good and not only for their group. A Muslim commentary on Fratelli Tutti, I think it was Tunja Dinshkar from the Hizmet movement in Germany. he spoke about the co-witnessing. So both are witnesses to their faith, but they are co-witnessing for the society. So that's more on methodology. The second point I like to highlight is Fratelli Tutti gives an intensive discussion of the question of religious identity. And that's not an abstract question, I suppose, but it's a real challenging question for our time. Of course, it's underlining that no one has to deny its identity, his or her identity in interreligious dialogue, but it claims or it invites that religious people have to distance themselves from closed and exclusive religious identity constructions. I quote, "As long as we do not obscure the sincere search for God with our ideological and expedient interests, it helps to understand us all as companions on the way." And again, the Pope problematizes the tendency to isolation and fragmentarization, the temptation to form closed groups. So, and that's very important because work together for a common good also forms open identities which show that at the base there's even more than cooperation. So I started with from competition to cooperation, but now you can say cooperation can be two closed identities which are working together for a common goal. But that's even more the idea. It's now from cooperation to real conviviality. That's more than coexistence. So I would say and we can speak about it, it's a real, the most important thing dialogue can provoke and can underline is that you have to come from a logic of separation to a logic of relationship on the religious level, but also on the level of society. Second point. The third point, interesting, it's the critique of the religious root of fundamentalism. So, of course, the Pope, where he comes to, he's always problematizing that you identify religion as a source of violence and terrorism. The source of violence and terrorism can be, I think, more looked on a political and also on an anthropological level, perhaps, of the tendency of people to exclude, to hate each other. It's not in the root a religious problem, but there is a religious root of fundamentalism, and this this view is uttered by Francis when already during his visit to Cairo in 2017 and was incorporated in the Abu Dhabi Declaration when he says, God Almighty has no need to be defended by anyone, nor does he want his name to be used to terrorize people. God Almighty has no need to be defended by anyone, nor does he want his name to be used to terrorize people. That's interesting because it undermines the concept of direct divine rights. Of course, there are rights which can be inspired by religion, but God does not need to be defended by divine rights. And consistently, it's the idea both Ahmed At-Tayyib and Pope Francis are defending is not only a religious freedom, which is very important, but the concept of a full citizenship to be established in our society. And that's more than only minority protection. It really means that the concept of full citizenships, which is not fulfilled in all states of the world, that all citizens have basically equality of rights and duties. I will come back to this in my third chapter. On the other hand, the brief statement you have heard, so it's the question about, so God has not to be defended by divine rights. On the other hand, the brief statement refers to the name of God. And I think that's very important. Without over-interpreting this statement, you can see a certain shift between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. Pope Benedict, you perhaps remember him, referred basically to the congruence between faith and reason. He was a German theologian, so he was very so he wanted to defend that faith is also in equality to reason, and religious-based violence for him was a question of not being reasonable in your not having equated a good relationship of faith and reason. Francis is, of course, not against this, but refers more to the, I would say, to the alterity, to the transcendence of God's name. And I think that's a very good point for Christian and Muslims themselves, so that you really have a deep respect of the transcendence of the unavailability, if you like, so that God is not part of your will, of your imagination, of your projects, but He's really the other of you, and you have to show respect to Him. So I think that's so it's really a theology of alterity you can read under this document. The last point I'd like to do is there are two new dimensions. I will skip the first one because it's more on the Catholic side, a new understanding of the Church. But the second one, I think it's very interesting that Francis has really this perspective, I would call it interconnectivity. So this interconnectivity has a social point and also a point, an ecological point, you can say. So on the social, on the social side, it's really the great arc between Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, that Fratelli Tutti is placing the image of man as a social being with a fraternal dimension of spirituality in the center. And there are some very critical passages on the more Western way of reducing human being to an autonomous, self-determined and individual being who is trapped somehow in isolation and indifference. He has a nice passage on the ideals of French Revolution, which perhaps you know are to have it in English. One moment. So it's equality, it's freedom, liberté, égalité, fraternity. So it's liberty, equality, and brother and sisterhood, so to say. And Pope Francis says they're all three good, but you always, so the tendency of Western philosophy is to put fraternity, brother and sisterhood, at the last point and to start with personal liberty. And so he really claims for a new orientation to put solidarity and fraternity at the first point, because man is not an individual being, but man is first of all a social being who is in contact with other being, and only is an individual being because he is in contact with other beings. And I think that's really a challenge for Western philosophy. The second point, which is important, and it's not because it's not restricted on the human-human relationship, and that's perhaps something we discover globally, I would say, in the last 10, 20 years more than ever, that man is not only in relationship to other human beings, but in relationship to all created things. And he's not at the center of all world, but he himself is part of a big interconnected net, you can say, in this world. And that's also a new challenge. How you can have an image of human being which is really part of the creation, and not only master of the creation, but really servant, Khalifa, if you like, of creation. Yeah, and I think that's a big challenge, but also a good point of thinking and working together of Christian-Muslim dialogue. So I think these are some of the hints which might be interesting in this document. So I come to the third point. So the third point is the reception and some resonances in the Islamic context. You see two persons here. The left one is Ayman Maziek, who is the representative of one large one large Muslim community in Germany, and the other is Tunjai Dinshkar from the Hizmet movement. So the first reception you can mention are individual appreciative voices of representative Islamic personalities. So the first one I mentioned was Ayman Maziek, the president of the Central Council of Muslims, and Tunjai Dinshkar, whose voice represents the reception on the Hizmet movement in the German context. And you can add some others, for example, Ataullah Siddiqui, a British scholar of Islam, or Amineh Hoti, the Center for Dialogue Action in Islamabad. Overall, the reactions are sometimes euphoric, I would say. Ayman Maziek writes, "This is how we Muslims place ourselves alongside Pope Francis and his encyclical Fratelli Tutti." And all are strongly emphasizing the common ground. Especially the connection between the love of God and the love of the neighbor is positively confirmed, and the connection between fraternity and the common good, which should explicitly transcend religious boundaries and religious group affiliation. That's our individual voices, although they speak for communities. This, in a second respect, you can say that, in a second respect, you can say some reactions more on the constructive, symbolic, representative nature. For example, the Abu Dhabi Declaration was not only a one-time declaration, but it was a higher committee for human fraternity, which was established and has a strong participation of the religious and political elite of the United Arab Emirates, so of the Emirates. And they, well, it's always on politics, of course, but they were able to establish the February the 4th, so in 1 month, as the Day of the Fraternity of All People by the United Nations General Assembly in 2020. So since 2020, the 4th of February is the Day of Fraternity to all people, so brother and sister, in a specifically interreligious and specifically Christian-Muslim dialogue. So it's up to us to celebrate this day also, which is in connection to Fratelli Tutti. And they also pushed the construction of an Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi, where a mosque, a church, and a synagogue and an educational center is in one place. And perhaps you know, the Hizmet movement is very active in Germany to construct the House of One, which is also, it's not a syncretistic building, but it's a part is a mosque, a part is a synagogue, and a part is a Christian church, but it's on the same place and even in the same building with a center of a dialogical space for all the three Abrahamic religions, at least. Yeah, and the third point I'd like, so these are more on the, well, the constructive level, if you like, so institutions and building. On a political or let's say society level, I think it's very important to see Fratelli Tutti also and the Abu Dhabi Declaration in this concept of cross-religious citizenships. Well, I don't want to speak about the Indian context, but for the Western and for the Near East, that's a very important point, to have a common citizenship for all the inhabitants. So there was a declaration in 2014 of Al-Azhar or of Marrakesh in 2016, and the Charter of Mecca in 2019. And they all appeal to a new understanding of non-Muslim minorities in Muslim countries, in analogy to non-Christian minorities in Christian context, to overcome just religious toleration and to come to equal citizenships. And on the Muslim side, well, it's up to you to know better than me, but they refer to the so-called Constitution of Medina, so a pact concluded shortly after the Hijrah between Muhammad and the Muhajirun, so the immigrants on the one hand, and the helpers and the Jewish tribes in Medina on the other hand. So at the beginning of the society, if you say, of the common society in Medina, there was a constitution, which is not exactly the right word in a modern way, of a treaty between different religious communities. Even more interesting, and that may be a basis for that it's not a new invention just to give equal rights to each citizens. Even more interesting on a theological basis was the Charter of New Alliance of Virtues, you see at the last point, which was prepared at a conference in Washington 2018, and then promulgated in Abu Dhabi 2019 again. This document does not refer to the Constitution of Medina, but to the so-called Covenant of the Virtue, Hilf al-Fudul, which was concluded by Meccan notables for the protection of a foreign merchant, and was honored later on by Muhammad himself. So there's some hadith on this. So that's interesting and crucial that this covenant of the virtues took place far before the first revelation to Muhammad. So it does not ground the commonality in Muhammad's prophetic role and on the basis of revelation, but in human virtue, thus in a sense on natural law, which is common to everyone who lives virtuously, not only to the revealed religions. And I think from there, a serious bridge can be built to the common orientation for a common good that is really bridging religious plurality. Yeah, I think so far to the reception, I think what is now important is that I think the documents, Abu Dhabi, Fratelli Tutti, the Declaration of Marrakesh, they are very good on a theoretical and theological level. Now it's important to implement also this idea of common good and of human fraternity practically into educational systems. And it would be interesting to see what is made from this on. I know in the Vatican that they have founded an institute for human fraternity who try to assemble worldwide people to promote this idea. I know that even one state, Timor-Leste, so it's a small state in East Asia, they include Abu Dhabi document as a part of their inspiring values of the state. And it's a question what for example Al-Azhar did. So do they implement Abu Dhabi document as a teaching in their theological formation of new imam? I know in Germany they do. Yeah, so I think that's the most important point. So how to implement it practically. The outlook and at the end, I cannot conclude to say that Fratelli Tutti and Abu Dhabi Declaration, they also gained some critical comments on it directed at the two documents. With regard to the interreligious dimension, more from a theological conservative side, if this is a good name, the theological interpretation of religious plurality was criticized, where in both documents the religious plurality was directed immediately to God's will, saying that it's God's will to have different religion. Is it God's will or God's toleration? That was a question. Or is religious plurality in every way a positive things, or are there also problematic things in it? One has to discuss. I think the Koran is quite clear on this question. The Catholic theology has to discuss on this, and I suppose the Islamic theology, referring to Quran, has also discussed on this question. The second point was more practical, I think, than the first point, and it's a question that the documents are speaking a lot about religious freedom, and they even go a step further with this idea of common citizenship. But we don't have only Christian and Muslim and Jewish and Hindu believers, but especially in the Western world, we have a lot of non-believers, and we have this idea of negative freedom of religion, that you also cannot be forced to be part of a religion. And it's interesting that the document is not speaking about the right to leave one religion or to think to have no religion. Yeah. My point would be, well, that was not the point of the Abu Dhabi Declaration. It was a declaration in between the monotheistic religions, and so there has to be a new approach to the non-monotheistic or even to the non-religious people. So it's not excluding them, but it's not speaking directly about it. Interesting, on the left side, you say to conclude with something positive, why I think that it's not excluding non-religious people, because it's resonating a lot in philosophical and sociological approaches, which were also from the non-religious side, just from the anthropological side. For example, if you see Charles Taylor or Jeffrey Stout, Bruno Latour in France, or Hartmut Rosa, you won't know, in Germany, they're all secular thinkers, more or less. And they all emphasize the necessity to gain a renewed vision of the human being, which is overcoming an isolated and individualistic approach, and to stress more the human being as a being which is inseparably connected, socially connected with other beings, be it human beings or the creation. So that's interesting that the secular thinkers themselves, without knowing Fratelli Tutti, they refer also to this important point of new anthropology. And so I came to the end, and I want to conclude with a quotation, a more poetic quotation of the Pope, to say, "This is a beautiful mystery that makes it possible to dream and to make life a beautiful adventure. No one can master life on his own. It takes a community that supports us, that helps us, and in which we help each other to move forward. How important is it to dream together?" So thank you. I hope you have a little inspiration from this document, and that helps you in your context to dream together between Christian and Muslims.
Thank you so much, Professor Specker, for this interesting and insightful presentation. This document, of course, has been talked a lot about in interreligious circles, and are important references for anybody trying to promote interfaith dialogue, especially between Muslims and Christians. But in the Indian context, of course, we look at the Indian society is much more diverse, and there are different communities, of course, Hindus being the dominant, Hinduism being the dominant religion here, and then Christians and Muslims and Sikhs, Jains also. So in this context too, this document, I mean, theoretically, apart from the specific parts that refers to the Islamic and Christian theology, there are a lot that we can learn from these documents and apply in our context here in India. So thank you so much. Now we open the floor for questions or comments from the participants. So anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand and unmute your microphone. On this subject, why don't Father Solomon say something? Because he, I think, has about this. So yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tobias. I am Solomon, a Jesuit from Dumka, Raiganj province of Jharkhand, state of Jharkhand. I am a social activist, social worker. It was an eye-opener for me, actually, to look at Fratelli Tutti as a document which can enter into the dialogue. But I thought the Fratelli Tutti started with a very good social, economic, and political and financial analysis, which actually leads to, rising inequality both in the world around. I think so. You rightly pointed out, was very good of you actually, that what is common good towards the common good? Is it possible for all of us to travel together? Thank you for that eye-opening. And I just wanted to, it has been with me in my mind, the whole understanding of interconnectedness with one another, promoting solidarity among ourselves, and of course now promoting interconnectedness with all the beings. I believe, for me, as an anthropologist, I believe that this particular insight is coming to us from the indigenous wisdom. And Pope Francis has accorded a very high understanding and priority to this particular insight coming from the indigenous wisdom, indigenous philosophy, and indigenous theology. And he takes it forward, and I think he puts it as you rightly said, rightly. I want to ask one thing. I read through the documents that you have sent. Beautiful. Thank you very much. And I am really taken up, though I have not really entered into the very, dialogue. I've been a social activist rather. And only in the last 1 or 2 years, I have been trying to promote a dialogue between various religions. At this moment, I am fully involved with the ecumenical movement, the Christian dialogue rather than the interfaith dialogue at this moment. But I want to ask, Fratelli Tutti for me sums up the whole social teachings in the last 100 years. And this is the best kept secret, as they say, within the church, social teachings. At the top level, yes, we are opening up and we are actually, transcending all those things perhaps which can keep us, excluded, becoming so exclusive. Does this document really, is it getting trickled down, permeating? Is there some changes that has been brought about in the Catholic churches, in the structures of the Catholic churches all over the world that can initiate a dialogue? I really thought that you may sort of point out Francis' recent journey to Southeast Asia, where he extensively actually interacted with leaders from the Islam community. And it was wonderful, beautiful, actually. It inspired me quite a bit. Do you think that this document is really gradually permeating the church and animating us? How? Personally, the elites within the Catholic Church, their language, their wisdom, is going very much ahead. But that does not really translate into the grassroots level where the church is active at the periphery level. Do you think that this particular document can really, in what way it can affect, it can get initiated within the structures of the church at a local level, at a diocesan level, at a province level, for the church? Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you for your inspiring views and comments. Yeah, that's a good question. So a document alone won't change anything. So a document itself, it's in the best way a reminder and a reference point. So, and I don't want to underestimate reference points. So it's important to say, well, we have what in the best way Vatican Council II was to say, well, we have Nostra Aetate, we have the teaching about interreligious dialogue in the Vatican Council documents, and since 60 years we are referring to it and knowing that it should inspire us. How does it get down to the grassroots level? And I think there are structural decisions of, well, I speak of Christianity and Catholicity, but every religious community has to see itself. For example, since 30 years, I would say the German dioceses work on establishing in each diocese a responsible person for Christian-Muslim dialogue. And I've worked myself for 5 years for one diocese as a responsible person. And the work is not so much doing theological work and on religious plurality, but encouraging parishes, encouraging movements, religious movements to meet on a very basic level. Meet their neighbors and getting a regularly regular meetings during the year. And I worked on this 5 years, just keeping on having common actions on whatever, cleaning the city, sometimes welcoming migrants. It was sometimes was just visiting each other for feasts. So one can say, well, not very high leveled, but I experienced there was a fire in the city where I worked in southwest Germany, where I worked for Interreligious Dialogue, and it was a fire in a house of a Turkish-born family, and it was not clear in the first in the first week, even if it was a terrorist attack or not, also a right-wing terrorist. Fortunately, it was not, but the city was in a complete upheaval. So they were completely disorientated, and there were a lot of protests. And this small Christian-Muslim dialogue group, which was meeting once a month, was the only group where Christians and Muslims knew each other personally, can phone to each other. I was phoning them and saying, well, do you know the family who lost some of their family members because of the fire? And so they knew them, and we could visit them. And so that's very basic on the grassroots level, where this high document of Nostra Aetate came through the structural decision of the bishop of this region, saying, well, I want to have one responsible who has the time and the resources to build context and to do this continuously and not only once, really has an outcome. So that is one practical experience. And thank you again for reminding on the Indonesian. Yeah, I think that was it's not only Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi was one of the reference points, but it was also his visit in Indonesia, which was quite important. And you have on the Muslim side in Indonesia, you have this Nahdlatul Ulama, so the movement, and it's, I think, the biggest Muslim movement in terms of numbers, who also are very active in Christian-Muslim dialogue. So then you have some changes if they get the appreciation through the Pope through the visit.
Thank you, Tobias. I actually we face a little problem in this area. Here, the indigenous people, the tribal people, historically, in a way, there is a certain sense of animosity with local Muslims. And of course, that animosity seems to be emerging from the Christian community, because Christian community consists of the tribals and the indigenous people coming from that particular community, actually, the specific community. So this it sort of an obstacle rather towards initiating many things. This is a cultural problem, actually, historical problem for us. We will have to face. But many people come together on a common good. We are working together with on displacement, on mining, along with the Muslims who are affected, and also Muslim leaders, not only those who are affected, but also those who have sort of empathy, sympathy, solidarity towards the displaced people. So we interact with those organizations in which there are tribals, there are indigenous people, there are other faith, people of other faith, and also, of course, the Muslim leaders, Muslim community people, student leaders, Muslim student leaders. So we interact with them on a regular basis on the issues of tribal displacement, on migration. The main in India actually responds to the migration problem of migration. That way, I think that dialogue. But as you rightly said, it has to move forward. It has to move forward to individual relationship and coming together for reflections, for theological reflections or prayer together, maybe. Thank you very much, Tobias.
Thank you, Sloman.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just have a question that I'm mostly curious about, Professor Tobias. I think this is just coming from whatever you said in response to Solomon. So I want to generally know, is it easier to have a dialogue between preachers and priests versus common civilians? What do you think is more successful generally? I'm very curious because as somebody who works in interfaith, I mean, I see a lot of organizations focusing on civil cooperation, and a lot of organizations also focusing completely, on interfaith dialogue between preachers and preacher/priests, or yeah. So I want to know what you think, in your personal opinion, works better.
Thank you, Ms. Naran. I have several aspects in my mind to your question. So I think concerning preachers and priests and let's say religious authorities, if you take it in a broader sense, I think there is the important point of religious education. So the question, does, for example, the study of Christian theology, Catholic theology, from my part, does it include the serious study of other religious traditions? So, for example, the Muslim students in Germany. So it's not so long ago, since 12 years only, there is a formation of Muslim theologians at German universities to become teachers, to become, well, some of them also parish leaders. I appreciate a lot that in their curriculum, in their theological studies, the interreligious dimension is included. So they have to have one module of 2 conferences, 1 seminar, so some credit points if you do it very practically, by visiting a Christian, a Catholic or a Protestant seminar and participating. So not only reading books, but going to the seminar and participating in the seminar. And they can change Catholic, Protestant, and another one is for Jewish theology. And that changes a lot. And I wished, and I'm working on, that we do as Catholics in the Jesuit formation the same. I know that my brother Victor Edwin is doing a good job in Delhi on this, by really including the encounter and the curiosity in the formation of priests. Because I think the main point is really to try to see the religion of the other with the eyes of the other. You can learn Islam from the Christian side in a very apologetical way, that you say, well, if the Muslim asks this question, what do I have to answer? What will be convincing? I think there are also Muslim apologists, they do it the same. So if the Christian asks, so how can you see what faults do they, and how can you? This does not help. This is not an understanding of the other. It's like a competition. But really to try to give an experience of the values and the existential meaning of the religion of the other for the other. Of course, not every Christian believer can do this. So that's it's somehow you need the formation. But the normal believer, so to say, sometimes they are very good, especially in women groups. They're very good in sharing the life of each other, and sometimes they understand much more on the religion than theologians do. So it's not exclusive, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
for responding.
Randall is next, and I think Solomon also has something to say, so he can go later. Randall first.
Thank you, Tobias. I would actually I read through the pre-readings and was very interested the one on Joseph Ratzinger particularly. I wanted to ask you about I was lost in the language in that particular that was used. I mean, his objection, and it is quite obvious that he was quite different in the way in his own positionality with regards to how he became the Pope, and from the previous two popes and the next one that followed him. So the exception among the four at least. So what was his specific contention about interreligious dialogue? He did bend towards intercultural dialogue, but was he lost in the semantics of what it means, or was it? I don't know. I could not understand what was it that because of which he made those pronouncements that are mentioned in the reading. I thought, and I have another question after this, but please go ahead, dear.
Yeah. Thank you, Randall. Yeah, coming back to Benedict. Well, it's also interesting. So it's Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger as a Pope. Benedict XVI is the same person. Somehow he also, I won't say a conversion, but somehow he changed his attitude himself somehow. Well, it started with this famous lecture of Regensburg, where he was quoting, and you know from the article, this apologists. You have it again from the Christian emperor who was denouncing Muhammad. And I think his main point was not about denouncing Islam, but taking this quotation as a motive of criticizing religious traditions who are not open to philosophical questions. So that for him, it was very important that philosophy and theology are working together, I would say, in a very simple way. So why did he have the idea that in Islam there is no encouragement of philosophical thought? I don't know this. I think he has a wrong. You can say, I know because what he read and what people gave him to read was Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm is a Muslim apologist of Al-Andalus in the 13th century, and he's very critical about reason. So there is about philosophy and about Ibn Rushd, and he was one of the opponents of Ibn Rushd of this medieval tradition. So that's why, but he was not well informed that's one Muslim tradition. There are other Muslim traditions who are very open to philosophy. So he took it as an example, and he was not well informed about this. So I would say that's something also for him to get more the richness of the Muslim tradition, and it was part of his lifetime to get more into the richness. I think his main motivation, which stayed till the end, and which might be more serious than his critique of Regensburg, was that he was always very cautious that interreligious dialogue was not a syncretism. And maybe that's more a danger. I don't know if it's a danger in other parts of the world. But of course, you have the movement, especially in the Western world, of people leaving each religious tradition behind them and making like a melting pot of all, doing a little bit of yoga, doing a little bit of Sufism, and doing a little bit of Jesus Christ. Well, at least they do, I would say. So it's already a starting point. But he was very critical about this melting pot dialogue. And he was a little bit, so John Paul II was much more heart opening. So he said, well, let's come and see what we can do. And he was more of cautious. And I think his whole person was very cautious not to make any faults. So I think that's behind. What we can learn is to take religious studies really serious. And not to, if we found one religious thinker, not only to stick to one thinker, but really to get to know the whole tradition. So I don't know if it's helping you. So if not, ask again.
No, it did. But there's also one part about the spirituality. Was that a kind of the move towards syncretism? Was it in some way that he viewed that it would dilute the kind of Christian spirituality that might have been practiced? Is that one of the reasons why? I don't. That part was not very clear. Maybe the depth of the spirituality.
I think it was about syncretism. It was about all this his being cautious about the Assisi movement. Although he was I don't know if you remember here. So Felix, it's a Jesuit friend. He wrote this article, and he has this wonderful quotation that Pope Benedict says, "I go to this Assisi meeting that nothing happens." So I think that's typical for him. So what can happen? At least it was a beautiful meeting. so somehow he get into, so there's no big danger. And what he did was interesting, because he invited not only the other religious traditions, but also atheistic persons, or I would say secular. It's said atheistic. I would say secular. So also participating more from a philosophical way. So why not? It's a good way. That was not the point of Pope John Paul, because for him, secularism was always connected to communism. So he came from the Soviet-dominated world, and he was very so he has no fear about syncretism, but his fear was communism. So and Pope Benedict's fear is not communism, but syncretism. So each pope has his own fear.
All right. Just another question. I think compared to the church in Europe, and you also mentioned this aspect about Western individualism, but going beyond that, there's a kind of there are these structures, the same hierarchical structures of the state, of state control. They exist even within the Catholic Church, both maybe in a different way in Europe and quite differently in India, where economic concerns are much more on the top of everyone's head. So, considering how interreligious dialogue is something that would be, peace or even a lack of conflict would be some world or an India or a Europe or a world without conflict and peace would be something that beyond the general fraternity, it would also be economically desirable, right? So I'm wondering within the Catholic Church, also looking at how it is such a the structure. It's among the richest institutions in our country, at least. So if there's a papal encyclical and or maybe there might be a papal bull, how much of this document or this decree then leads to an actual change in maybe how budgets are allocated towards this kind of work? How much of budgetary allocations and the right people going in the right place? Because you also, again, in the case of Joseph Ratzinger, he moved one person who was in charge of promoting this kind of a thing to another place altogether. So it's so easy. The next pope who might come in might be of the same dispensation. So I'm wondering within the Catholic Church, in a way, maybe what Solomon is asking, how is this trickling down? But would you be able to comment on how much of these structures are then put in place that the money or the resources that goes towards this kind of study and then dialogue then stays put.
Thank you, Randall.
A long question, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's not easy to answer. But the first thing I would say, it's not only Catholic Church, but also the Jesuit order it's somehow hierarchical movement. So I'm quite it's my life surrounding, so to say. But I would say, even especially because I know hierarchy and hierarchical structure, hierarchy never replaces commitment. So you can't force someone to have a special conviction. So even if the Pope says it is like this, it won't change anything, or it won't change a lot if it does not meet the conviction of the persons. And again, that was my question at the end, to trickle down. So how does this Abu Dhabi document, for example, really gets into the teachings of the theological seminaries, the parishes, and so on? Already in Solomon's question, I would say I thought of this. Another big topic of Pope Francis is synodality. We just have this World Synod and of course, also, especially, I don't know how in India, in Western Europe, some persons were somehow disappointed that there was not a decision about a bigger role of women in the church, for example. What I can understand, especially from the women's side. But nevertheless, I think the change, the cultural change behind this idea of synodality is very important. And it's not only on the high level, but it also concerns a Jesuit community like mine. So, of course, as a superior, I'm so for some years I'm responsible for the community. Of course, I could say you should do this, but human beings, so they say yes and they don't do. So also there, you have to have a kind of synodality, which means more than having a democratic talk, but really learning to listen to the other and to the experience of the others, and to have also the trust and confidence that when different persons are sitting at the table and they are really in a spiritual process of in silence, preparing in silence, listening to each other, and then again listening what topic, what insight is coming out of it. Things are changing, and they do change. So a brother of mine was one of the moderators in Rome of my community. He was a moderator of one of the tables, the round tables, and he was very impressed about what was happening there. So there were 2 women participants, one cardinal of Togo, one American cardinal, and one German, I think, one German bishop. And the American cardinal was one of the most profound critics of synodality. But at the end of the table, he was not against it, because he was convinced that this way of listening and responding to each other really changes. And I think that would be one of my answers. I think for all religious community, this approach of coming together and really trying to develop a culture of listening to each other it's a big challenge. It's not so easy as it looks like, but if it's happening, it's really changing something.
Thank you, Solomon. You can go next quickly, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Yeah. I think we must understand actually the whole evolution of the changes that is taking place both within the church in relation to the other religion and also in relation to the involvement in the society. From the point of view of the whole sociological theory of whole tension between the centripetal and centrifugal forces. One, definitely, it's an institutionalized church. We have to acknowledge that. And it's a hierarchical church. We have to acknowledge that. And hierarchical church means power, classes, and other forces will play a role in that way. I think we must acknowledge that, definitely. But at the same time, the sociology also teaches us that the changes are very incremental. Changes gradually comes, where revolutionary forces in many of the areas may happen at very short-term changes, but also it may not sustain itself. So I think the changes in the last 20 years, 30 years within the church is pointing towards at least a democratization of the ways that's happening. So I think, therefore, Francis' idea of transcending the geography, transcending the religion, but at the same time, having a very strong spiritual identity within you, I think that forces us to move, to transcend beyond us, beyond religion, beyond geography, and go towards as a humanity. This solidarity is a very, very great concept. Therefore, synodality, even many bishops, they don't like. But in India, they are going to have a sort of a conversation. At least they are going to have a conference. And now lay people, anybody can send in their, any issues that need to be discussed, they can send. They are inviting application, they are inviting the people to deliberate and things like that. I think that way we have to look at it from the point of view. It is those who are initiating the dialogue at the periphery level gradually will affect the center. This is my deep belief. So, but for example, what she asked for this one, yes, at a priestly level, when they initiate, there is a visibility. That visibility gives us a sense. But we are at a very peripheral level. We are living in the villages. And if we have a sort of initiating the dialogue at a civil society level, we may not have a visibility, but we will have an effect on the center. I think these forces will, at least at some time or other, will meet together. This is, for me, it is very important to give me hope. Actually, give me hope on the people. Also, I draw inspiration from Max Weber's understanding of religion at a different level. People at very working class people, their understanding, conception of God in all religion will differ from the conception of God. For example, the late Benedict XIV, he had, he is coming from an academic background, and he is talking from his own scholastic understanding of this one, whereas Francis allows the peripheral understanding of the issues to inform theology, in a way doing theology in the context, within the context. I think that is the beauty of it. And of course, he will take the insights and see where we are going on. This sort of, it is not syncretism, I think, sort of a synthesizing the whole human life. I think that way, I think we need to take it in a way. Therefore, it may have an effect even on churches understanding that there is salvation only within the church. This concept is coming from a longer time. It will have an effect on that. Then ultimately bringing all the religions together. I think this is the comment that I would like to make. Sorry if I exceeded time.
No, thank you. It's very interesting for me to hear this. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, can I ask your email? Yeah,
of course. I saw it, but I'm not multitasking. I will write it at the end.
I'll share it in the group, Solomon. I'll do that. No problem.
I think Ranveer has got a...
exactly, Fatmi, Mr. Fatmi, you can just share my email. You have it because you have my email.
Ranveer
Hi, Professor Specker. It's wonderful to just hear you. I was just stuck in traffic, so I was just listening you since the beginning, and the moment I reached home, I just switched on to the laptop. And though I don't hold any much authority in theology and all, but I think as Solomon was saying, and as my other friend, he was also just mentioning it nicely, and I believe that this trickle down thing is quite possible within the Christianity itself as compared to some other religion, because as an outsider, I believe that Christianity is much more organized religion as compared to other religions. You have church has a proper structure, proper hierarchy, licensing, routines, institutional frameworks, processes, and lots of things. So the possibility of trickling it down is quite high in this institutionalized mechanism rather than other religions which are not that much institutionalized in the sense of this process, administration, flow of the information, and so on and so forth. And I think because then while considering this, it will be a very much challenging to see the interreligious dialogue, because in one religion we are expecting this expansion of information to the bottom with a very faster pace, but similarly this might not be happening with a similar pace in other religions also, because as we all know that the religion is the as the very famous saying that this is the opium of the masses. And whenever we talk about all these liberated thoughts, all these thoughts which are challenging the orthodox mindsets and very regimentized functioning and thought process within various religions, it comes from those intellectual elites are who are very small in number in all the religions, not only in Christianity, in Islam also, in other religions also. So this is a very small number who will be having these kind of thoughts. And as Solomon was saying very rightly, that at the bottom these things are completely different. So people's way of thinking, way of processing the knowledge, even access to these kind of new what do you say, new evolution which is happening on the religious lines also, that is also not getting transmitted to the bottom. So this will really be a very challenging scenario in the future, but surely we will be hoping for the best.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ranvir. Thank you. That's challenging what you say, and well, I can nothing do but agree, but also to underline, yes, there are religious ideas which have to trickle down, but also to appreciate traditions of mutual living together. So it's about ideas, but it's also about the respect of lived conviviality. So I've been to East Africa, for example, and the tradition of East Africa, for example, is traditionally the living together of the religion was very, very good, so to say. Well, sometimes like this and sometimes like this, but even in the families, the Muslim and the Christian traditions were quite intermingled. For a European, that was very astonishing. So I know a lot of Christians who are named Christian boys who are named Ali or Hussein because they have somehow a Muslim background, but they became Christians, and then the Christians became Muslims again. So and it's not about all the people becoming fundamentalists, but it was somehow also an influence not by the people but by intellectuals. So by Salafi preachers coming to East Africa and saying the people, well, you don't have to intermarriage. That's forbidden. That's haram. Or you have to be quite cautious with the butcher's meat from Christians. So don't buy meat from Christians. So there is also unreflective conviviality and dialogue among the people, or among some parts of the people who are living what we are preaching. But you have to see that they get encouraged in this, and you have to prevent extremist preachers disturbing and even destroying this conviviality.
Yes, thank you so much. So with this, we can conclude this session. I know that Professor Specker has to leave for another meeting. So thank you so much for your time, everybody, and thank you so much for coming, Professor. It was a pleasure listening to you. Yeah, so we will see you all, the participants, next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Fatmi, and thank you to everyone.